So you've been working on yourself for a while now, and you've actually done the work. Say you read up on overthinking and you tried what the advice said to do, and it helped you for a bit. Then a few months later, you noticed you couldn't say no to anybody, like you were being a people pleaser. So you also worked on that. And then you were irritated all the time at people who didn't deserve it. So you also worked on your anger issue. And then it was comparing yourself to everyone. And then it was not being able to start anything. And then it was that flat feeling where nothing really lands. Different problem every season. Same tired feeling underneath all of them. And somewhere in there, usually late at night, the thought shows up that you don't say out loud. How many of these are there? Am I just going to be doing this forever? Patching one thing while the next one gets in line? And underneath that, the worst one. Maybe none of those things were ever really the problem. Maybe the problem is me. So if you've been putting in the effort, but things just only sort of working, then new issue keeps popping up. This episode is for you. Welcome to Self-Full, the show where we get to know the parts of ourselves we never actually choose. My name is Wilson, and today is a big one for me. This is the idea the whole show is built on, and I've been putting it off for 9 episodes because I wanted to be able to say it in plain words. Every episode so far has been one symptom, the spiral, the anger, the quitting, the going back, but today we're going after the things underneath all of them. So today's episode is built differently. There is no problem to solve today. There's just something to see, to be aware of. And here's where we're going today. Why your list of things to fix never runs out, and why that's genuinely not because something's wrong with you. What that one thing actually is and where it came from, because you didn't choose a single part of it. And what happens when it feels threatened, which is the closest you'll ever get to watching work in real time. And no, we're not going to try to get rid of it. By the end of this, you'll know exactly why that would be a terrible idea. Stick around. This is where we start to look at who we really are. Let's look at what's actually happening here, because I think most people misread it. Let's say you fix one problem that you think you have, and it works. And then a few months later, you're dealing with something that feels completely unrelated. Say you deal with overthinking. Now it's that you can't say no, so you deal with that. Now you're snapping at people. Each one arrives looking like a brand new problem with a brand new name. And there are 2 ways people explain that to themselves, and both of them are not exactly healthy. The first is, I'm just a mess. There's an unusually long list of things wrong with me and I'll be working through it forever. That one's exhausting, and it's the reason a lot of people quietly stop trying. And the second one is, none of this stuff actually works. Self-help is nonsense. Nothing sticks, so why bother? But look at the shape of what's happening for a second. I've made 9 episodes on this show so far, 9 different problems, 9 different names, and putting them together, I kept noticing the same thing. Underneath all of them is the same feeling every time. That's not a list. That's a pattern. And a pattern usually means there's one thing making it, not a dozen. So let me show you what's making the pattern. And this is going to seem like a detour for about a minute, but stay with me because it's the same mechanism. I want you to picture yourself in 4 different situations, one at a time. Same person, same day. The first one, you at work. Think about how you actually talk there. How your voice sounded different, how the words you pick up are different, how much you laugh, and how loudly you do in front of coworkers. Second, you with your closest friends, the one you never have to be careful around. Now hold that up against the work version of you, and it isn't a small difference, isn't it? Your voice is different, your laugh is different, the words are different. Most likely, you will never talk to your manager the way you talk to your good friends. Third, you at a family dinner with your parents. Compare that to the first 2 because something strange happens in this one. You don't just talk differently. You get younger, not on purpose. It just happens. And chances are there are whole opinions you hold on to that your parents are simply never going to find out about. And the fourth one, you on your own at 2 a.m. Nobody's watching. You're not performing for anybody. No voice to put out at all. That is 4 different versions of you in one same day in the same body. And here's the part that should strike you as strange. You never once decided to switch between them. Nobody sits in a car before a family dinner choosing which personality to walk in with. You walk through the door and the switch just happened instantly. See, something is doing that. Something is building a you for every room you walk into. And it isn't you deciding. It has a name. It's your ego, which I'm not exactly a big fan of this word. Honestly, because it's been ruined. When people say something like, he's got a big ego, they mean arrogance. And that is not what we're talking about here at all. Your ego is closer to something like your identity department. It's the part of you whose whole job is building a version of you that fits. One that gets along, gets accepted, and doesn't get thrown out of the group. It's been doing that job since before you had the words for it. That's the machine. That's the mechanism. And nobody has ever introduced you to it, which is a strange thing to say about something that has been running your whole life. So today, we're doing the introduction. Where it came from, what it cost you, and what it looks like when you catch it working. And let's start with point 1. Where these versions came from. So where does these versions came from? Because you certainly didn't sit down and design them. So let's watch how one of them actually got made. You weren't born with a work voice. At some point, some part of you was scanning the room, probably in your first week at a job or your first week at a school. You look for what gets you approved in this environment, what gets you laughed at, what gets you left alone, and then it quietly builds a version of you that fits, not on purpose. You didn't sit down and design that version. It assembled itself out of whatever worked. And the family version is probably the oldest one. That got built when you were maybe around 4, 5, 6 years old, in a room where you had almost no powers and desperately need things to go well. That's why it fires before you can stop it. You built it before you can think about building anything, and it still runs on the original setting. It's why you can be a whole competent adult and still turn into a slightly sulky teenager at your parents' dinner table within about 11 minutes into it. Now hold all of that next to your list of problems, because this is the part that matters most. Why can't you say no? Because the version of you learned a long time ago that agreeing with people is how you stay safe. Why do you overthink every message? Because the version of you checks how people are going to take it before it ever gets sent. That's its whole job. Why does it sting so much when someone gets you wrong? Because there's a version being defended and it just took a hit. Same department, same job, different rooms. You were never working through a list of separate faults. You were meeting the same system over and over and giving it a new name every time. And that's genuinely good news, even if it doesn't feel like it yet, because a long list of faults is hopeless. You'll be at that forever. One system you can learn to recognize is a completely different situation. You don't have to fix a dozen things. You just have to get to know one. Alright, so how do you actually catch this system in the act instead of just agreeing with me in theory? And here's the first tool. Name the character. The move is simple. Pick one room in your life, one situation you walk into regularly, and give that version of you a name, out loud or in your notes. Not a cruel name, a plain, slightly affectionate one. The work version of me, the family dinner me, the group chat me, the interview me, the first date me, etc. And start with an easy room, not the hardest relationship in your life. Take something like work or a group chat or how you are with strangers. The versions built in the most painful rooms are the oldest and the most defended. Those become visible on their own later, once you know what you're looking for. Then describe that character in a most honest way, like the way you describe some character in a show that you're watching. What does their voice sound like? What are they good at? What do they never say out loud? And what are they afraid would happen if they stop doing all of it? That last question is the most important one. So let me give you 2 examples of how it comes out. The work version of me talks fast and agrees with everything, and it's afraid of being seen as difficult. The family dinner me goes quiet and gives short answers, and is afraid of starting something. You'll find a fear like that under every one of them, and it's usually surprisingly small and surprisingly old. But here's something to keep in mind, because this can tip the wrong way. Do not do this as an accusation. Every single one of these was built to protect you, and most of them did their job. The tone you want is closer to how you talk about a friend you find a bit ridiculous but genuinely love. If you catch yourself using this to prove you're a fake, you've turned a mirror into a weapon, and this is what we want to avoid. Now, let me show you what naming a character looked like in a scenario, and then I'll tell you why it works. Say you're on a train home from work, and you decided to give this a go. So you pick the easiest room you got. Okay, it's work environment, and you give that version of yourself a name. Work me. And once you start describing that character, It's almost embarrassing how specific it gets. Work me says, no worries constantly. Work me apologizes for asking questions. Work me has a laugh that is genuinely a different pitch. And you've never once heard it outside of that building. Work me has never disagreed with anyone in a meeting, not once in 2 years. And then the last question, what work me is afraid of? And it arrives faster than you'd like. Being seen as difficult, being the problem in the office, being the one they regret hiring. And then you sit with that for a second because something has shifted. Work me isn't a mask you put on to trick anybody. Work me is a whole character that got built to keep you safe in a place where you were terrified of getting it wrong. And that character did a decent job. I mean, you've still got that job, right? But this is the first time you have ever looked at that character from the outside instead of just being in it. So why does giving a version a name creates that bit of distance? Because naming it moves you. When you're inside a version, it doesn't feel like a version. It just feels like being you. It's like the sound of your own house. You stop hearing it. The moment you give that version a name and says the name out loud, you step back far enough to look at the version instead of out of it. And that little bit of distance is the whole game. You can't look at something you're standing inside. And notice what naming it doesn't do. It doesn't stop the version showing up. Work me will be at work tomorrow, cheerful as ever, still saying no worries to your coworkers. But that's fine. That was never the goal. And honestly, it shouldn't be. The goal is that now you know they're there. And for the first time, there's a bit of daylight between you and them. So that's the system. And you can now see it working. One department building a you for every room since before you could talk. And I know the question's sitting there. Isn't that just being fake? No. And here's the difference. Adapting is normal. You talk differently to your grandmother than to your best friend. And that is not dishonesty. That's being able to read a room. Everyone does it, including everyone you think of as deeply real. The tell isn't whether you adapt, it's what the adapting costs you. And that cost is real, and it's measurable, and it shows up somewhere very physical. Somewhere I bet you've been misreading for years, which leads us to point 2. Why some room leaves you wrecked. Here's the second thing, and it's the most practical idea of this episode. It's about why some room leaves you completely drained. Because running a version of yourself costs energy, real energy. Think about what's actually involved. Holding a particular voice, keeping an eye on how you're coming across, editing what you're about to say before you say it, watching the other person's face to see how they took it. See, all of that is work. Your brain is doing it constantly in the background, and it comes out of the same tank you need for everything else in your day. Now, some versions are cheap to run. For example, the version of you that are just home alone and you don't have to think about what the other person might think because you're home by yourself. This version basically costs you nothing. And also, the one with your closest friend also barely costs you anything because there are almost no editing happening. You say what you're actually thinking, it goes fine or it doesn't, and nobody is watching how you come across. But some version of you are enormously expensive in terms of energy cost, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You get this very taxing feeling. Not the tiredness from work being hard, but a specific kind. The exhaustion that doesn't match what you actually did. You know the one. You went out for 3 hours, you sat down, you ate food, you did nothing physically hard at all, and you came home feeling like you've been hit by a truck, and you couldn't explain why, and it seemed a bit dramatic to even mention it to anyone. Well, let me tell you, that's not you being dramatic. That's what 3 hours of running an expensive version of you actually cost. And once you see that, a lot of things starts explaining themselves. Why one friend leaves you energized and another leaves you flattened, even though you like both of them. Why some family events needs a day of recovery. Why you can be with certain people for 8 hours straight and feel fine, and with others for 40 minutes and feels like you need to lie down. But there's a part I don't want you to miss because it's the whole point of this episode. That exhaustion is not evidence that something's wrong with you. It's evidence of how hard that system is working on your behalf. Every one of those hours that your ego, your self-identity department was running, reading the room, adjusting you, keeping you acceptable, keeping you safe, it never took a break and it never asked you for anything. It just quietly did the most protective job in your entire life and sends you the bill in the form of being tired on a random day. That's not a flaw. That's a system that loves you and doesn't know when to stop. So we're not going to try to fix that system. We're just going to read the bill. And here's the second tool. Follow the tiredness. Whenever you get home far more drained than the evening itself can explain, you ask yourself one question, and it's not the usual one. It's not, what's wrong with me? The question is, which version of me was I running just then? And then there's a follow-up question. And this is where it gets genuinely useful. What was I editing? What did I not say? What did I soften? What opinion did I sat on? What was I keeping an eye out on the whole night? See, that is your answer. The expensive version isn't the fake one. It's the one pulling the most weight, the most editing, the most amount of work. And what the editing measures is the gap between who you actually are in that room and who you feel allowed to be. And you don't have to do anything about it yet. You're just looking, and that's the whole job. Nobody is telling you to go be your unfiltered self at your grandmother's birthday. You're just gathering data on where your energy actually goes, because most people never once connected the feeling of being completely shattered with the fact that they spent all evening performing. Now let me show you what that looks like in a scenario. Say you get back from a dinner with a group you've known for years. The dinner took 3 hours and it was fine. It was nice even. But then you get home and you're so tired you can't even face the dishes in the sink. And there's this flat, scraped out feeling you'd normally just call it being tired. So you ask yourself the question, which version was I running tonight? And you already know, that's the group where you are the easy one, the upbeat one, the one who has funny stories and never brings the mood down. And then, what was I editing? And the list comes fast, which is its own answer. You edited out that you've been struggling for a month. You edited out that job you applied for and went nowhere. You laughed at something you didn't think was funny. You said, I'm good. Yeah, busy 4 separate times. And every time you said it, some part of you went quietly somewhere else. I mean, you've been through 3 hours of that. Then no wonder you're wrecked. And here's what you notice. It isn't that you don't love those people. It's that they never met the version of you that's having a hard time, because that version has never once been allowed in the room. See, your body has been keeping score this whole time, and it doesn't lie about this. You can talk yourself into believing the situation is fine. You can rationalize, you can be fair, you can list all the reasons someone is lovely, but what you cannot do is talk yourself out of being wrecked every single time. The tiredness is information you're already collecting every week for free. You've just been reading it as a personal failing. Something like, I'm bad at socializing, I need an early night, instead of reading it as the bill for 3 hours of performance. And this is why this tool sits in the middle. Naming the character shows you the system exists. The tiredness shows you where that system is working the hardest, which is where you'd want to be paying attention to instead of trying to overhaul your whole personality at once. So now you can see the system and you can tell where it's working the hardest. But both of those happens afterwards. You can only catch them after you've been into that different room, only after you're already feeling wrecked about the whole day, which leaves the hardest moment of all. While the system is actually running, you're mid-conversation. That version is going full speed and you're not observing anything at all because you're inside of it. That's what the last tool is for. It's the only one of those 3 that works in the moment, which leads us to point 3. What to do when you catch the system defending itself. There's one particular moment I want you to be able to spot. It's the moment the ego stops quietly building and starts defending. You know it by the feeling. Somebody says something slightly off about you and you feel the flare. You need to correct it right now. Or you're arguing for a position you don't even hold, but you said it out loud already, so now that you're stuck defending it. Or you catch yourself telling a story in a way that makes you look a bit better than what actually happened, and you didn't decide to do that. It just came out that way. That's the ego working. That's your identity department protecting what it built. Because as far as your identity department is concerned, the version is you. So a threat to your identity department is a threat to you. And here's the trap. Once you can see all this, the very first thing you will want to do is fight it. Catch yourself performing and get annoyed about it. Try to stop being like that. Try to be authentic aggressively at all times. Please don't. And it's worth understanding why, because this is the exact point where most people go wrong. What you'd be fighting is a protection mechanism, and protection system responds to attack by protecting harder. So when you attack your own defensiveness, what shows up to handle that? The same system. Now, if you got a version of you whose entire identity is being the person who's really honest and doesn't wear a mask, which is, of course, another character in a slightly better costume. You can't get out of this by fighting because the fighting is the same machinery. There's a line I've never been able to improve on. You don't get a fist to open by pulling at the fingers. It opens when you understand why you're gripping. So we're not going to fight it. We're going to do something much smaller and much stranger. Here's the third tool, and it's the anchor of this whole episode. It's a sentence, 5 words that you say silently to your own ego, to your own defensive mechanism the moment you catch yourself defending itself. And the sentence is this: thanks, I've got this one. That's the whole tool. You feel the flare, the rush to correct somebody, the story coming out slightly polished, and you say those 5 words in your head. Then you carry on with the conversation. And I know how that sounds, so stay with me here. Because that little sentence has 2 parts, and each part is doing a completely different job. So let me explain. The first part is the word thanks. And you say thanks because it's true. It's because it's the opposite of a fight. That reflex is genuinely trying to protect you. It's the same system that got you through school, the interview, and difficult dinner table. It just doesn't know what year it is. And it thinks the mild comment about your work is a threat to your standing in the tribe. So you don't tell it to shut up. You thank it. And the strange thing about acknowledging a protective reflexes is that it settles. The same way a person who feels heard stops repeating itself. The second part is, I've got this one. And that's where you take the wheel. You're not saying the feeling is wrong. You're saying you'll handle the response from here. And then you do the next 30 seconds deliberately instead of automatically. Maybe you don't correct them. Maybe you say, actually, I don't know, instead of defending a position you never held. Maybe you tell the story the unflattering way, small, nothing dramatic, just once. And notice you didn't have to stop feeling defensive to do any of it. The flare can still be going, but you're not required to be calm. You're required to be driving. Let me show you those 5 words working in a real moment. Say you're at an after-work drink thing with colleagues, and someone brings up a project you're working on, and he gets the details slightly wrong. It makes it sound like your part was smaller than it actually was. Not maliciously, it's just that the person misremembered. And instantly, there's a heat in your chest popping up, and a very complete sentence assembling itself in your mouth to correct the record. Now the defensive you is fully awake. The defensive you cannot let that stand. But you catch what's happening. Instead of firing back, you said it in your head in about half a second. Thanks, I've got this one. And the heat doesn't disappear. That's not what happened. What happened is a tiny gap opens. And in that gap, you get to choose. And you notice something almost funny. Nobody in this room cares about this. Nobody is keeping score of your contribution to the project that you're working on. The only person in the building who needs this corrected is the character you built to survive here. So you let it go. You say something else. And the conversation moves on exactly as it would have anyway. But you walk out of that room with something you didn't have before. The first real evidence that you and the defensive you are not exactly the same person. So why does saying that 5 words in your head opens up the gap like that? 2 reasons. The first, you cannot be inside the reflex and talking to it at the same time. The instant you speak to it, you've separated from it. It's the same move as naming a character. The second one matters more. Everything else people try here is a fight, and a fight is more of the same. Stop being so defensive. Don't care what they think. Just be authentic. All of those are you using effort to force a change in yourself, which is exactly the machinery that builds the version in the first place. Thanking it is the only move on that list that isn't a fight, which is why it's the only one that doesn't feast the system it's aimed at. And here's how this last tool holds the other 2 together. Naming the character shows you the system is there. Following the tiredness shows you what that system is working the hardest. But both of those happen in hindsight after the moment has passed. This is the one that works while it's happening. And every time you use it, the other 2 gets sharper because you're building the habit of noticing in real time. So let's do a quick recap. Here are the 3 tools as one motion. You name the character. The work me, the family dinner me, the defensive me, whoever else is in there. You name them kindly, like people you know rather than crimes you're prosecuting. Then you follow the tiredness, because exhaustion that doesn't match what you actually did is the bill for how hard that system has been working for you. And then when you catch it defending itself, you don't fight it. You tell it, thanks, I've got this one. And you take the next 30 seconds deliberately. And look, I'm going to be honest with you. For a while, you will spot all of this far too late, but realize that's not failure. That is the practice. Noticing it late turns into noticing it slightly less late, and eventually turns into noticing it mid-sentence. And let me tell you, nobody starts out catching it in the moment. Slowly but surely, you will get better at this. I promise you that. And remember where we started? That list of things to fix. You sort out one and another one just shows up. The overthinking, the not being able to say no, then the irritation, then whatever was next, and that quiet fear that you'd be doing this forever. And here's what I want you to walk away with. There was never a list. There was one system showing up in different rooms wearing different clothes. And every time it shows up, you give it a new name and try to fix that one on its own. And that system was never the enemy. It's the reason you go through the rooms you had to get through. Some younger version of you worked out how to be okay in a room where you had almost no power. And that took real skill. That skill is still running. It's just still using the setting it learned back then in a room that aren't dangerous anymore. So you don't have to fix yourself one more time. You just have to be able to see the system that's been doing the building. Because the moment you can see it, you're the one holding it. And it goes back to being what it always was, a very good tool that loves you, that wants to keep you safe, that wants to continue to protect you. And understanding your ego is how you can fully utilize this tool instead of being run by it. If this episode resonates with you, send this episode to the person in your life who's always working on themselves and never quite feels finished. And I bet they'll recognize that endless list straight away. And if you do name one of your character this week, I would genuinely love to hear what you call them. You can find me on Instagram at Self-Fulf Podcast or drop me in the comment on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So this week, see if you can catch that system working. When you do spot it, thank it for trying to protect you and then handle it the next 30 seconds yourself. And remember, your ego is always there for you, and I'm always here for you too. Take care.